entered the moving the goalpost phase of the Trump administration's response to the fallout from news of a double-tap boat strike in the Caribbean in which U.S. forces killed survivors from an attack on an alleged drug trafficking vessel. What experts from across the political spectrum believe may have been a war crime. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth today called it a matter of, quote, deterrence. Watch.
Deterrence has to matter, not arrest and hand over and then do it again, the rinse and repeat approach of previous administrations. This is meant to get after that approach. And I will just end by saying, as President Trump always has our back, we always have the back of our commanders who are making decisions in difficult situations, and we do in this case and all these strikes. They're making judgment calls and ensuring that they defend the American people. They've done the right things. We'll keep doing that, and we have their backs.
In which the Secretary of Defense comes out against arresting any survivors. There's brand new reporting in the Washington Post on this story, and it reveals that military officials are today angry at comments like that. They see it as an attempt to shift blame for the killing of those two survivors from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, to the commander overseeing the operation, Admiral Frank Bradley. Admiral Bradley is a decorated Navy SEAL. He has decades of experience. He was among the first to deploy to Afghanistan after the September 11th terrorist attacks. He is currently the head of the U.S. Special Operations Command, which oversees operations in more than 80 countries. The Washington Post reports that the White House press briefing that we showed you yesterday, in which Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that it was Bradley who authorized the strikes, quote, elicited a furious backlash within the Defense Department, where officials described feeling angry at the uncertainty over whether Hegseth would take responsibility for his alleged role in the operation or leave the military and civilian staff under him to face the consequences. Quote, this is Protect Pete bull bleep, said one military official. Another official said of Leavitt's statement, quote, it is throwing us, the service members, under the bus, end quote. Another person said some of Hegseth's top civilian staff appeared deeply alarmed about the revelations and were contemplating whether to leave the administration. Meanwhile, the New York Times also has new reporting on the incident. Citing 5 U.S. officials, the New York Times reports this, quote, Hegseth, ahead of the September 2nd attack, ordered a strike that would kill the people on the boat and destroy the vessel and its purported cargo of drugs. But each official said Hegseth's directive did not specifically address what should happen if a first missile turned out not to fully accomplish all those things. And these officials said his order was not a response to surveillance footage showing that at least 2 people on the boat survived the first blast, end quote. Now, none of what is being reported today disputes that a verbal order to kill everyone on board happened, which is what the Washington Post reported in the first story that blew all of this wide open and into public view. It also invites more questions about Hegseth's conduct during the attack. As friend of this program, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling remarked yesterday, quote, from a military perspective, if a subordinate is about to give an unlawful order, it is also a requirement for a senior official to stop him from executing it and then counsel him. So there's that too, end quote. And we know that Hegseth was involved. We know that he watched it live. He told us himself the day after the strike. Watch that.
That was definitely not artificial intelligence. I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented. And that was Tren de Aragua, a narco-terrorist organization designated by the United States, trying to poison our country with illicit drugs.
I watched it myself. It wasn't AI. The White House earlier today, Pete Hegseth said that he watched the strike. But he said he didn't stay around for the entirety of the operation, adding this, quote, I did not personally see survivors. The thing was on fire. This is called the fog of war. So now we have a new piece, right? In Pete Hegseth's world, there was something more important that day than monitoring a live feed of a lethal strike being carried out by the men and women of the military. Something more important was happening at the Pentagon that day. This morning, the Bulwark summed up what Hegseth has had to say so far this way, quote, in other words, Hegseth was there watching live but didn't issue any orders, but was extremely happy that the spirit of the orders he never issued were executed anyway. which he then took credit for in real time and hailed as a glorious triumph without revealing that it wasn't. All of this, of course, is perfectly right for a bipartisan investigation by Congress. It is what they are supposed to do. But Team Trump, once happy to go on Fox News and celebrate the strike in those friendly confines, has suddenly gone silent. The Washington Post reports this, quote, Senators Roger Wicker and Jack Reed published 2 letters they had sent to the Pentagon weeks earlier requesting the videos and orders documenting the boat strike, which so far have killed more than 80 people. To date, the Pentagon has not complied, a delay that has surpassed the time required by law for the administration to respond to Congress. A mountain of violations and excuses and finger-pointing and nonsensical statements and passing the buck to the men and women of the military as the Trump administration faces questions now as to who knew when what appears like a war crime was committed. That's where we start today. Here with me at the table, my dear friend, my dear colleague, Rachel Maddow. We'll talk to her about everything going on, but importantly, she's here at the table to talk about her brand new must-listen podcast, Burn Order. First, I want to bring in, though, for our benefit and to inform our conversation, retired U.S. Air Force Major General Stephen Lepper. He served as Deputy JAG there, as well as Deputy Legal Counsel to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's also a member of the former JAGS Working Group. It's an honor to have you here. I tried to get smart enough to ask you the best questions I could think of, but can you just make clear in my mind the act that is not in dispute, which is that after the first strike, after the boat was on fire from top to bottom, bow to stern, I think is the right way to say it, there were 2 survivors, and that any strike that killed them is, the act itself is a war crime. Is that the place from which we're starting?
It really is. And what you described and what the Washington Post described in its initial reporting was no less than murder, to put it very succinctly. When you're involved in a military operation, there is fog of war, as the Secretary said, but the law is still the law, and the law doesn't change whether or not there's fog obstructing it. And so what failed in this situation was that everyone from the Secretary of Defense on down to the people who pulled the trigger failed to recognize or recognized and did not do their duty to disobey an unlawful order.
General,
folks in the water are defenseless, and attacking them is indefensible.
And folks were quick to point out on this show that at every level of the military, that is the actual example of defenselessness, that in the water, an attack on a vessel that leaves any of the passengers alive but in the water is the line that is put into the training, put into the military. This may sound like a dumb question, but I just have to ask it. Admiral Bradley would have known that, right?
Absolutely, especially as a naval officer. I mean, he would be familiar with the rules regarding maritime rescue of shipwrecked sailors. And in this particular case, his first strike shipwrecked those sailors and shifted his duty from one of attack to one of rescue.
So what do you think happened?
Well, I believe that at some point, someone's orders were either intended or construed to include killing everyone on board, including survivors. And that is an order, quite frankly, that in and of itself is a violation of the law. You cannot give orders that require no surrender or no survivors to be rescued or civilians to be killed. And if any of those were present in that situation, our duty is to protect them under the law, not continue to target them. So communication may have broken down. People may have interpreted the Secretary's kill everybody order, which the Washington Post reported he gave, to include everybody, including those protected classes. But at some point along the way, everyone who was obliged to disobey what is clearly an unlawful order. An unlawful order, as you said, is a textbook example from the DoD law of war. An example of an unlawful order is killing survivors in a shipwreck. Someone along the way should have recognized that was an unlawful order and disobeyed it, or at least questioned it and gotten clarification by the person who issued it.
General, let me ask you this. If an operation is viewed in real time, there's a live feed, but it's also recorded for multiple reasons. Maybe the most important for the spirit of this conversation is oversight and the record. The video exists. The answers are knowable to all the questions you just posited. What needs to happen to make sure that all of that is preserved and that all of the answers and the truth and the role of Admiral Bradley and everybody who serves under him is known and that the facts emerge?
Well, the one ray of hope in this whole story is that Congress has agreed to investigate this, because in investigating, what I hope they will be able to do is get all of that evidence. They'll conduct a forensic investigation, which will include getting all of the videotapes, getting all of the testimony of the people who were involved in the strike from the top all the way down to the trigger pullers. And we'll be able to approach this as a way to collect the evidence for their own use, but hopefully the use of anyone who is going to be holding the people responsible accountable. Because at some point, if Congress fails to investigate this as fully as is necessary to sustain some kind of accountability under the law, then an investigation of that sort will have to occur as well. And right now, I'm just not sure that this administration has expressed any willingness at all or evidenced any willingness at all to engage in that kind of investigation or in that kind of accountability.
Hundreds of Washington Republicans, of course, revolted against Trump over his probably biggest political vulnerability and oddest charge that he's faced in this whole first year of the term, where Donald Trump basically went out of his way to repeatedly minimize and defend a sex trafficker, refusing the transparency he once vowed and giving lenience to that trafficker's co-conspirator. That's just a capsule summary of what Republicans ultimately had to revolt against rather than defend when there was a vote. Top Republicans, though, have not stopped there. It would seem that, as we heard from some of our experts during that week, what started wasn't just going to end, because if the emperor had no clothes, or whatever phrase you want to use, Republicans found that they did have a voice, and most of them didn't face any great consequence or punishment in the real world for standing up to Trump independently once. And you might do it twice, indeed. On some issues, it's quite obvious that Republicans do better running against Trump, even if they worry about his personal vendettas in response. The issue now this week, of course, is the serious questions about how this Trump administration conducts war and whether, as experts are questioning, whether a war crime has occurred. So people want a lot more answers from Defense Secretary Hegseth. The question about whether he was directly involved overseeing, allowing, or directly ordering what would amount to what appears to be, according to experts, a war crime committed in that Caribbean boat strike. Now, we have a top Democrat leading the probe who will be with us later tonight. And you've certainly seen some of the big news about this. Republicans also just know big picture that Trump is weakening. There's a new poll that finds him cratering to a second-term low. 47% was where he was at the beginning of the year. Now, crashing to 36 from Gallup. Trump also held one of these long cabinet meetings today, and he did touch on issues that have dogged Republicans and are certainly in play in the election I mentioned tonight. The high prices, the inflation, the affordability. Polling shows Americans have made up their minds about this, and by an overwhelming 2-to-1 margin. That's a margin you don't see on issues like guns or abortion or culture, but 2-to-1, people have come together, including a lot of Trump voters, to say, look, he is responsible for the rising prices. Here he was today.
And, there's this fake narrative that the Democrats talk about, affordability. They just say the word. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. Just say it. Affordability. The word affordability is a con job by the Democrats. Affordability is a hoax that was started by Democrats.
where do you even begin? We kept the actual views of the American public up on the screen so you could see that the public paying higher prices doesn't think these are hoax problems. And although not everyone follows every political development, people do generally remember that Donald Trump and the Republicans ran against Biden-Harris on inflation and high prices. It was the affordability stupid, or as our friend James Carville long ago said and is often quoted, it's the economy stupid, because people can't just be lied and spun out of what they're facing. And so amidst all these issues, including some we'll cover more tonight, I'm going to have more details on that reported potential war crime and more on some Epstein follow-up later in the hour. We begin with Donald Trump apparently trying to deny an iron rule of politics. People know how the economy is doing, and they will hold you responsible for it. No better way to introduce James Carville, a campaign strategist. He is now saying that when you take it all in, Donald Trump's presidency is all but over. James, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, gravity is a Democratic hoax. Just see what it is. I mean, of course, it's something that people are experiencing in real time. And when he says it's a hoax, how can you solve a problem that you say doesn't exist? All right, and that's essentially what he's saying. And I mean, politically, yeah. Let's look at Tennessee 7 tonight. You talked about it earlier. You know, there's an old saying that close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. I would add a third to that. Close would count in Tennessee 7. That would get a lot of people's attention in a district that Trump carried by 22 points. I might point out to our Civil War buffs that Franklin, Tennessee is located in the 7th Congressional District. And if you don't understand what happened in Franklin in 1864, it wasn't very good for the South, to say the least. So there's a lot of interesting things going on right now, Ari. And of course, affordability is real, and people experience it every day in every interaction they have with commerce.
As you say, Trump seems like he knows this is an issue, so it affects him however he thinks about it politically, personally, but he hasn't rounded the circle to look at it seriously, to really address it. I mentioned this briefly. I want to play Karl Rove, the longtime Republican insider, talking about you. Take a listen.
If the Republicans want to maximize their victories in 2026, they need to go back in the Wayback Machine to 1992 and remember the immortal words of that great strategist, James Carville. It's the economy, stupid, he said, and you got to have an agenda that is forward-looking. What are we going to have in the way of pro-growth policies that Americans will say, yeah, that'll make my family and my community and my financial prospects better?
Is he right? And does that mean we're just asking if you're right? But what do you think there?
Well, first of all, it's very flattering for him to say that about me. And of course, Carl knows that, and everybody in politics knows that you can't escape these issues that are every day. I mean, a human being has 20 different interactions with the economy every day, and you have to talk about it. It can't be denied. It can't be escaped. And he tells a bunch of sycophants in the cabinet room that it's not an issue, and people see that, and it's just going to hurt him more. I mean, it's ridiculous to call this a Democratic hoax when you see what people are going through. By the way, it cost Harris the election. I think it's pretty clear that was a big factor in the Democrats' defeat in 2024. I think we learned something from losing. I don't think he learned anything from winning. I mean, sometimes you got to take a lesson away from winning, and I don't think he took a lesson away. I think we did.
It's funny when you put it like that. And Trump is famously the reality show star. People know that, the PR. But he may be losing a step. We can get into that. Politics is, you're on the field, so you're going to see how you're doing. On whether he's processing information, I mean, The Atlantic has this piece out. They call him the bubble-wrapped president. You mentioned the sycophantic cabinet. They're thinking along those lines. Everyone around him, everything he sees on TV and his phone is telling him he's right. Poll after poll suggests Americans believe Trump is now getting it wrong. Do you see that reality, the gravity you mentioned on the way into this convo, as what's finally separating Trump from this Republican House? We heard forever the narrative was, they're going to go along with anything. And on Epstein, on some economic messaging, and perhaps on this ongoing questions about what happened in the ocean, there seems to be more independence.
Well, first of all, Trump is, I think, 79. I'm 81, and you're not going to win against age. I can tell you. I'll fight as hard as I can. It's ultimately a losing battle. I don't want anybody to be sick. Okay, I want to be very clear about that. But I see all of the stories that everyone else sees. And if you look at this dust up in the Caribbean and you contrast that with President Obama, who Trump, by the way, Trump says he wants to court-martial for what? Shooting Obama, shooting bin Laden. Look at the professionalism of that and the way it was handled post-event compared to this thing in the Caribbean where Pete Hegseth doesn't know anything about it. Trump doesn't know anything about it. No one knows anything about everything. And you contrast that in 2011 when President Obama, famously in the Oval Office with everybody around, Vice President Biden, Hillary Clinton, and the Secretary of State, and they were all sitting there absorbing it in real time. I mean, I think there's a good contrast and a good lesson for American people to learn here when these kind of operations are carried out, how they're done. Now, I don't want to tell you a bunch of I don't know who these people were in this boat, but I knew exactly who bin Laden was, and I knew exactly what bin Laden did. And I didn't need any convincing that it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. On those tensions, I want to play a little more, read a little more here from Axios reporting about the GOP speaker battles. More lies from the speaker is how Republicans put it. They call it a public feud. Monday, the weeds of it are Stefanik accuses Johnson of basically getting rolled by Dems because they stripped a provision which would require the FBI to tell Congress when it was opening these counter intel pros. If you want to get into those weeds, James, be my guest. I mean, you're already my guest. I guess it's a redundant statement. But I'm curious more about the politics of it, where they're basically turning Mike Johnson back into Kevin McCarthy. I mean, it's like if you're a Republican, you've watched how many speakers go down in the MAGA era, and maybe people who are against their agenda say, okay, maybe that's better for the country. They don't want to see some of these things passed. But what does it tell you about how hard it is for them to stand by the speaker who, I'll remind everyone, they just recently picked?
Well, Stefanik is running for governor of New York. She's clearly feeling the heat on every point. And so the finger point, what are we not even at the end of the year yet? The election year hadn't even started, and the finger pointing is already starting. I mean, that's what that is. Let's blame Mike Johnson. Let's blame this. Let's blame John Thune. Let's blame somebody. But let's not blame the guy in charge. And that just does not work because people have a tendency to blame the guy in charge. I mean, Mike Johnson is a kind of pathetic, although he's a fellow Louisianian. He's one of the more pathetic characters of this century. And he was put in there because he was compliant and they couldn't find anybody else to do the job. And he's done as bad a job as you ever thought he would do. And he could do it. Now, Stefanik, and you're going to see more and more of them jump on him or blame somebody else who, like I said, we're not even in an election year and we're already starting the blame game.
Well, it certainly doesn't show any faith or confidence that they have in their ability to appeal that decision, which was categorical and blistering, that it was a violation of the appointments clause in the Constitution and that there was no power to do what, the new U.S. attorney did. But they're essentially giving the defendants the opportunity to set up a whole bunch of other objections, including the objection that this is a vindictive and a selective prosecution, that there are flaws in the grand jury process, and of course, ultimately, just that they're not alleging a real crime and that no crime took place. But that's why, to me, it's beginning to feel just like abuse of legal process, because the point is not so much what result you get, but just putting somebody through hell in order to get to the result, even if they end up winning.
Well, look, Congressman, I think you hit the nail on the head here. I have been saying for weeks that the Justice Department under this Trump administration has been re-engineered to serve the president's purposes. And when that happens to the Justice Department, we get things like this notion that they're going to take another look at James Comey and New York Attorney General Tish James. There hasn't been any new evidence. You know, it's not because there's been a development. It's because they weren't successful the first time. So this is what the big boss wants, because it's about loyalty and what he wants and serving his purposes, not the law. So they are going to do it. So how do you combat this? I understand James Comey and AG James, that they are prepared on their legal side. But you all as members of Congress, what is it that you can do? Understanding you are in the minority, but one day you may be in the majority. And I have to wonder if there will be investigations about this and other tactics that this Department of Justice specifically has engaged in.
Yeah, I mean, they're just redoubling their completely futile efforts. I mean, anybody who is not completely in the Trump cult can understand that this is a totally vindictive, selective prosecution with basically confected charges that nobody can articulate. But, you know, that's why I think about, you know, the story of the emperor's new clothes, because the people around Donald Trump just scrambled to make him believe that there's something to what he's saying, and there's not. And this is why we're getting completely absurd outcomes all over the world, including shooting down alleged drug boats as an act of war when no war has been declared, completely outside the laws of war, completely outside of due process, because they just let him entertain whatever fantasy he's got, and they just go and implement it. So the country has really got to start drawing the lines and saying, we're not going to accept this. The courts aren't going to accept it. Congress is not going to accept it. Democrats, Republicans, the media, nobody's going to accept these blatant violations of the rule of law anymore.
Meanwhile, over at the FBI, it has been a very difficult few weeks for FBI Director Kash Patel. There is a leaked 115-page assessment that was compiled by National Alliance of Retired and Active Duty FBI Agents. They describe Patel's leadership as a rudderless ship. Let me read you just one incident from this report. According to the assessment, on 11 September, the day after conservative activist Charlie Kirk's assassination, Patel arrived in Provo, Utah, but refused to leave the FBI jet without an appropriate raid jacket. A described highly respected source in the report explained that agents working the Kirk investigation had to stop their work to find a medium-sized jacket for Patel. When a female agent's jacket was delivered, Patel complained about missing Velcro patches on the sleeves and refused to disembark until SWAT team members removed patches from their own uniforms and attached them to the bar jacket. I get that the jacket incident is not the single most dangerous thing that Director Patel has done, but I do think it illustrates the extent to which he is cosplaying a law enforcement leader rather than actually acting as one.
Yeah, I mean, we get reports of these kinds of utterly petulant and infantile tantrums and, you know, behaviors about Director Patel all the time. But, you know, the major real issue here is just that morale is just utterly shot. Yes. At the Department of Justice. They came in and they just sacked a lot of the most senior and effective prosecutors. They brought in people who are not qualified and keep getting disqualified in court, you know, in the Third Circuit, in Virginia, as we've seen for various reasons, flaws in their appointment and their inability to do the job and so on. And what's going on, meantime, in the Department of Justice is an absolute hemorrhaging of staff and morale and commitment. And, you know, you can think about any workplace in the country. There's no way an institution can survive very long with these kind of repeated collapses of confidence in the leadership.
Congressman, I want to shift gears a little bit and get you to weigh in on today's amazing cabinet meeting in which the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense seemingly tried their best to throw General Bradley under the bus, or at least carry the weight of the decision regarding the murder of the innocents on the high seas, as I like to put it. You had Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth today talk about those events as a fog of war. Let's take a quick listen.
I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. has exploded and fire and smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war. This is what you in the press don't understand. President Trump has empowered commanders to do what is necessary, which is dark and difficult things in the dead of night on behalf of the American people.
We played that clip a little bit earlier for a general and a lieutenant colonel to get their response and reaction. I want to get yours, sir, because I'm curious if you think that the fog of war offers military members protection for potential illegal acts.
No, it doesn't. And we didn't see the fog of war. We just saw the fog of government propaganda. That's MAGA ideology right there. Look, the whole military project, if you could call it that, I'm not quite sure what it is, but the whole project of attacking alleged drug boats does not have the authorization of Congress. So war is not a metaphor in legal terms. You can't say, well, there's a war on poverty, a war on illiteracy, a war on drugs, and so we're going to just start killing people. Congress declares war, not the president, not the Secretary of War. So that whole operation is flawed from top to bottom, but I think the world has seized on the fact that there were people who were desperately trying to survive the first round of gunfire, and then they were killed, which, even if it were a lawful war, would be an absolute war crime to engage in. Given that it's not a lawful war, it's just compounding the crimes that have taken place. So to introduce the concept of fog of war, it's a clever attempt, but that's just a move to distract people, and it's an irrelevant distraction from the fact that they are clearly violating the laws of war, and they may indeed just be engaging in murder at the high seas, because this is not lawful criminal law enforcement activity.
Congressman, I think we all agree. I'm sorry, but they're trying to gaslight us on everything. They're trying to gaslight us on killing these people on the high seas, as Michael Steele likes to say. Kash Patel is trying to gaslight us about this damn jet he's using when he is literally on record criticizing former officials for use of the jet, and then he gets his little taste of power and he's using it. They're trying to gaslight us about these political prosecutions. They are actively gaslighting us. So I'm going to end where I started. What can Congress do? If America gives you all back the majority, gives Democrats the majority in Congress, particularly in the House, what does accountability for this egregious level of gaslighting look like from you all's perspective?
Well, we've got the full panoply of constitutional powers at our disposal, right? So we've got the power of the purse. We get to control the budget of the Secretary of Defense and the Defense Department and of the executive branch of government. That all comes from Congress. We, of course, have the power of impeachment, trial, removal from office for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. We have the power of legislative oversight to subpoena people to come in to scrutinize executive actions that may be running afoul of the law. So, I mean, that just scratches the surface of what our powers are. But the point is that Congress writes the laws. The role of the president is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And to the extent that the president or anybody under the president is running afoul of the law, we have a multitude of different ways of addressing that kind of lawlessness and criminality.
Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat of Arizona, who appeared in that video telling troops not to follow illegal orders, joins me now. Senator, first I want to get your sense do you have a clear sense or a clear story from the Pentagon about what happened here, or do you need to know more?
Oh, we need to know a lot more, Chris, and thank you for having me on. I went back and listened to some of the tape where I was asking some questions in the secure facility about those strikes. And there was, a lot of holes, and they could not give us a lot of information, and I felt they were being rather evasive. And it was not a compelling brief. So there needs to be an investigation. But I also want to comment on some of the video you showed of President Trump and Pete Hegseth. I mean, this is not leadership. We've never seen presidents, secretaries of defense that have acted in this way. The president is blaming Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is blaming the admiral. You know, Hegseth is basically turned around and doing the 100-yard dash in the opposite direction. This is exactly not the kind of leaders you ever want running any organization.
Yeah, I want to read for you. I mean, this caught a lot of people's attention in the last few days when, as this story was developing, Pete Hegseth posts on X, let's make one thing crystal clear. Admiral Mitch Bradley is an American hero, a true professional. He has my 100% support. I stand by him in the combat decisions he has made on the September 2nd mission and all others since. America is fortunate to have such men protecting us. When this department says we have the backs of our warriors, we mean it. A lot of people interpreted this as a very obvious attempt to pin this entirely on the admiral.
100%. But is anybody surprised by this guy? I mean, this is the most unqualified Secretary of Defense we've ever had in the history of our country by far. I mean, he runs around on a stage talking about lethality and hunting and killing people. He's working for a president that says, hey, we're just going to, we're going to go out and kill people. This is kind of the environment that these folks have created at the Department of Defense, and it has serious, serious consequences. Now, there needs to be an investigation. I don't want to prejudge anything, but we need to get the facts. We need to see the video, and we need to call Pete Hegseth, certainly in front of the committee and ask him, some serious questions about his leadership, the orders he gave, the environment that he has created in the department.
Roger Wicker, the Republican senator from Mississippi, is the chair of the Armed Services Committee. Senator Reid from Rhode Island is the Democratic ranking member. And it was striking. They put out a statement saying, we want an investigation here. And I've talked to some people about, is this real or not? Like, are we actually going to see genuine oversight and investigation from Senate Republicans on this? You're much closer to them than I am. Do you have confidence this is real?
Well, I have confidence in the chairman of the Armed Services Committee that he's going to try. But are we really going to get transparency from a Department of Defense that has fired inspectors general and JAG officers, the lawyers? They're not looking for transparency. I think they're going to do everything they possibly can to make sure that the real story doesn't get out. But I will say this, there's video. And that video, should be shared. They shared the first part of it with the American people. There's also a legal analysis that I think needs to be made public as well, which is, it's got a lot of holes in it, a lot of circular logic on why this entire operation has been, conducted. And I still have a lot of questions about it.
Yeah, let's stay on that for a second, because I think there's some senses in which it's been my view just watching this. It seemed to me that the legal predicate or rationale for these strikes is incredibly thin and amounts to essentially killing civilians using wartime powers and authorities that are undeclared, unsought from Congress, and not publicly argued for. Now, in this case, the killing of two survivors is so clearly something that's, out past what's legally allowable. It seems to have captured people's attention. But do you think we should be having oversight of the entire operation as well, even if they are, they are drug runners or they are smuggling drugs or whatever is being alleged here?
Well, yeah, we don't want drugs coming into our country, but this appears to me, and I think many others, to be a law enforcement problem. And we have to do a better job interdicting, these drugs coming into the country. A lot of this stuff goes to Caribbean islands first. Some of it goes on to Europe. Some of it goes into Mexico and through the southern border. But this is a job for the Coast Guard or sometimes a joint operation with the Navy. But Coast Guard does the law enforcement, operation here. And, they have taken our country, in a direction that now we have members of the United States military that have been put in an impossible situation because they're given, in the case of what we've seen here over the last couple of days, clearly unlawful, illegal orders. And there's tremendous pressure on them. And that was the point, of our video, is just to remind, members of the military that they have an obligation to follow the law. wasn't specific to this case. But when you consider who this Secretary of Defense is and who this president is, we felt it was a very important message to get to our warfighters.
There was a very strange moment today in which the president was having a cabinet meeting where Pete Hegseth was sort of once again kind of reiterating his distance from the ultimate decision on the second strike. And at the same time, or roughly contemporaneously, there was a press conference at the Pentagon who, they've basically kicked all the traditional, let's say, reporters out because they wouldn't sign this somewhat ludicrous agreement to basically allow the Pentagon to vet. So it's now filled with a very strange group of characters. And your name came up. There were some questions about the investigation. I just want to play you a little bit and get your response. Take a listen.
Okay.
If Secretary Phelan were to recommend court-martial, that could be an option on the table?
All options are on the table at this moment in time, and we look forward to getting the Secretary of the Navy's review. And the Secretary of War has been very clear in his statements as well that he takes this extremely seriously, and it is unacceptable.
What is your response to that?
I haven't even been notified by the Navy. The only notification I've received of any investigation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for basically saying what's in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That's how ridiculous this is. But the only notification I've received is a tweet from Pete Hegseth. And that says everything you need to know about our Secretary of Defense, that he cares a lot about his Twitter account, how many views, who's following him on Twitter. That's the only notification I've received. These are not serious people. I can't imagine the Secretary of Defense, if he wants to come across as somebody who, or the Secretary of the Navy, if he wants to come across as a professional, that he'll pursue this because it's so patently ridiculous. But I'll tell you what, Chris, doesn't matter to me what they decide to do. It really doesn't, because I'm not backing down. I'm not being intimidated because this isn't really about me. It's not about those other 5 people. It's about the President of the United States and his desire to intimidate people, service members, retired members of the military, government employees, American citizens. He didn't like what I said, and because of that, he wanted me killed. And now he wants me court-martialed. And he's going to force this Secretary of Defense to try to do it. They know where to find me.
Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.